Thank you very much, and it's a real privilege back to Rachel Carson Center, because I was here as a first-year student, and it really influenced my whole life and my work, what I have learned here. So it's a special case that I could be here. And first I would like to show just a short clip about how does it look like a wood pasture and what you can hear and see if you are on a wood pasture which is managed and made. Oh, sorry, it's we need to close this. Okay. So there are large trees, which they are mostly look like ancient, but sometimes they are quite young. You expect they are very nice and large, and also it's really important the livestock, and also the herders who are just standing there, and also the elements, the grasslands and the bushes is also part of the whole systems, and they are trying to work together. So this was just a short get to an inspiration. So, okay. So this is how it looks like on a picture. Oops. So the wood pasture or forest grazing or silvopastoral systems could be interesting from many cases in the environmental humanities, because actually it was already mentioning in the Greek and the Roman mythology. So many stories take place actually on wood pastures and talk about the herder's life in the Greek mythology. But it's very important also if we study the medieval times, because it was one of the most income for the people during this time, the forest grazing, and especially the pannage, the acorn feeding. Not just the pig, actually also the sheep and the cattle is the acorn. But also it's really part of the folk culture of Europe as well in Hungary. So it's really important topic. But of course they produce the wood pastures also nowadays really nice and healthy food, as for example very famous Iberian pig ham, which is quite expensive as well. And also nowadays it's getting more important if we are talking in a European Union level, so about the agricultural subsidies and also about how we should support the farmers and what should we advise and not advise for them. And also it's really important from a nature conservation side, because it's between a grassland and the forest, so there are many species which kind of really specialize for this kind of mosaic habitat, and they need grazing as well, but they need large ancient trees. As yesterday or a day before was mentioning about that in Munich there is also a bug which needs holes on the trees, so actually wood pasture is really good for these old dying trees. And also, which is a kind of high topic in environmental humanities, it's a topic of wilderness, and in Europe many people are kind of replacing the wood pasture as a wilderness, and they are talking about that this should be look like a wilderness as a wood pasture look like. But without people they are talking, so it's a kind of tricky topic, because as I mentioned already, in the Greek times there were wood pastures and people were managing, so it's 1,000 years that this habitat is managed by a human here in Europe. So in my work here in Rachel Carson Center, I'm developing a book based on my PhD, and so there are many topics which I could highlight. So for example, the world and the European context of this topic, or what is unmaking, and what is the socio-ecological impact of this, or what is the policy background, which is very fizzy. Sometimes unmaking, supporting the unmaking processes, sometimes it's supporting the remaking processes, and also about the traditional ecological knowledge which belong to this, and also the fifth topic, which is now I will talk a bit more, and that how we can inspire the people to do shepherding the wild as a scientist actually, and make a real impact on social ecological issues. So here is Hungary. It's kind of actually it's not really far from Munich, it's 6 or 7 hours by train. And I work mainly in the Trans-Danubian region, but also in other hilly and wooded region of Hungary. So most of the work actually is around the lake of Balaton. But usually if we talk about herders or shepherds, especially in Europe, suddenly we stand up in a fairy tales or in a folk tales. So they are very characteristic persons of the folk tales. And now I should share you a story, which is kind of a real story. So here is my great-granddad, and my both side of my family has herders in my ancestors, but he's on my mom's side, and he was a traditional herder. But my great dad, he left this lifestyle, and there was when I grew up, I told many times the story that how my great grand didn't pass the shepherd hook to my granddad because he was kind of angry that he wasn't followed this traditional lifestyle, and because he said that, oh, you don't need anymore this shepherd hook. And I was growing up with this story I heard many times because it was kind of, I think, a traumatic story in my family life. And suddenly, just in January, after I was on a field, I was in actually one of the pasture land, and one of the herder from the next village just arrived to this pasture land, and he gave me this stick, which is as a present for my PhD and also for my activities. So I brought back home, and this was the moment when I just realized, oh, a shepherd hook arrived back to our family. So now I just pass it around so you can see it, because I will talk about it a bit later. And but how is it happened that a biologist actually started to work on wood pastures and talk with herders? It's not a very common situation in a science and natural university where was the main topic for evolution biology. So we didn't really talk about the real conservation questions at all. So this is a picture from my childhood, and it's from my dad's side. And so I just realized that I was growing up around herders. So it wasn't a traditional event. Actually, this photo thanks to the German tourists, because it's not far from the Lake Balaton, and it's a very popular holiday place because the Western and Eastern Germans could meet up by the Lake Balaton. So it was a whole show for the German tourists, and as a local children we were able to participate in it. So I grew up this background, and I never thought that I would work with this kind of issues. I was really willing to be an ornithologist, and when I entered the university, I started to study behavior of a very, very rare bird, the leather white-fronted goose, which is not breeds in Hungary, it's breeds in the north, but it stops for for resting during the migration. But already this time I got many influence about conservation, and I just realized that it's much more important to kind of protect the habitat and not just focus on one species. And also I wanted to do something practical things, because I was kind of from my family background, I was kind of forced that it's not just an ornithologist or just an environmental person. It's a kind of tricky with a farmer background. So I was looking for a topic that could be where I can also focus on the human role in the conservation, but it's also related to somehow to ecology. And this time I was reading many literatures about forest history, and I was visiting also landscapes, as in Transylvania and Romania, where is a working landscape still. So I just realized that the forest dynamics is very kind of close to what is happening on a wood pasture and on a working wood pastures. So I was asking people that, what does it mean, forest grazing, and how could it impact the vegetation, these kind of questions, and everybody told me that, forest grazing is not exist anymore. And there are no herders in the woody regions anymore. And actually it's not really traditional ecological knowledge in Hungary, so we are in Europe, that there are no people actually who could have this kind of knowledge anymore. And they were talking of, which was taught, actually, sorry. It was taught at the University of Forestry that forest grazing was actually an important historical forest use, but nobody's practiced anymore since the 19th century, end of the 19th century, because it was forbidden totally by Maria Theresia. So it was a kind of huge mistake because she lived in the other century. So it was already, so it's still, there is many people thinks about this issue. So I was starting as a BSc student to work on this topic because I thought it was interesting for me. But what I have found at this time that everything was abandoned. So actually most of the wood pastures look like this. So it was really just hiding behind the shrubs and the closed forest. So, and this time also, actually, if we see just the scientific recognition of the silvopastoral system, it wasn't much really recognized by the science also around 2005. So now the number of the studies are just regrowing, and it's similar as a traditional ecological knowledge in Europe. So I used interdisciplinary methods during my study. I did also vegetation survey, landscape ecology work, and also processed related literatures, and also the main part of my work doing interviews with herders, farmers, and also the communities, also children as well, and participating in herder meetings and sometimes the activities. So what does it mean, just back to the abandonment issue? So as you can see, the gray is in the 50s and the black is in 2010. So, and the data comes from a GIS database of the Hungarian wood pasture, and I was comparing old land satellite pictures with 2010, and it shows that in 50s, the wood pastures look like this, so there was just scarce shrubs around it, and in 2010 it was getting more and more shrubby dominated. And so as you study wilderness, you can ask that why is it kind of bad if we just leave it as a wild, these areas? Because actually if we leave it as a wilderness, and I mean real wilderness, so there is no any activities, first of all, we are just losing a habitat of rare species, the large trees, diverse habitats, cultural heritage, the possibility of sustainable food production, and also, which is very important, it's nature-based self-supporting lifestyle for the local community, which is also mentioning now by the community conservation movement. And the other very practical things, if a wood pasture became more shrubby and forest, it became a registered forest area, and the forester will take part of it. So usually it not became a wilderness, it became intensive forestry areas after that. So, and as you can see, it's really threatened situations because most of the wood pasture has registered forested area in the pasture land. So it was I was talking with the farmers, and I realized that these issues that they are not allowed, even if they want to reuse their pasture land, they are not able because there is a registered forested area. So, but it also can cause the movement of the rural people to everywhere, because it was a study made by one of my students in his village that he showed that why the people stopped to keep the cattle in small-scale farming. The main reason was that they were not allowed to use anymore the common wood pasture. So it wasn't that because they didn't want it. Actually, there was no pasture land left around the village. So this is kind of the policy history just shortly. So there was 4 main events. That first, actually, it was during the middle of the 19th century, where was an act about the forest and pasture separation, and it's re-influenced the whole land use system in the Carpathian Basin. And after that it started to using more intensive forestry and agricultural management, and also abandonment of traditional management during the Soviet time, and this became more and more at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and after the cooperatives stopped working and mainly became private areas or nobody's areas, this was the time when they stopped to use them. And now it's a process started, that a kind of remaking process. There are many reasons behind them, but actually I can say that one of the most, it's really helpful that we have this European innovation goal which would like to support the agroforestry systems. So about the main concept, just the shepherding the wild activities, it's really familiar with, similar with the First Nation people in North America, as perhaps you know the book that Tending the Wild. So when I read this book, I just realized that it's the same happening here. So they were really carrying and looking after the wild edible medical plants and mushrooms, and take care for this multifunctional landscape as well. So okay, so this is back to the shepherd's hook, which shows actually that there is a still living traditional ecological knowledge in Hungary, because if you want to have this shepherd hook, which was made just now recently, it's really need a traditional ecological knowledge, because you need to find actually the shrub where you can grow this, and after usually to grow up, they choose a straight branch, and after 2 or 3 years they are looking after this branch to have much nicer, and sometimes already they are carving patterns inside. So this is the process. How do you make? So it really depends and related to traditional ecological knowledge. So now the main question actually, that who will be the herder, or how we can inspire the people to maintain the shepherding the wild, because it's a very hard work, and it's really challenging in our time. So this is the questions now, that how we can have this. And so the first, which is really important actually, that you need really based on the research data. So actually, without to have those research, I wouldn't be able to work for this slow or other activities. So now we have data about that living forest grazing around Hungary. There are herders communities, and there is living traditional ecological knowledge. So now I have this data, so I can show the people. So the first actually, which is I think one of the most, for me as well, one of the most important, that we were able to change the forest law. And it was kind of in a very fortunate situation. Around 2013, I was discussing with a former conservation ranger who became a farmer and advisor for other farmers about this forest grazing issues, because as a conservationist we have realized that it's a need for it, and also we know that there are many herders are doing secretly these activities. So actually we set up we felt that okay, we will not harm anybody if we will make a proposal, because it's totally forbidden from it was forbidden by 1961 during the Soviet time. So actually it's okay, we said that we will make this proposal, and we were kind of really respectful for the forestry, but we were using a very high low languages. So we were really wrote down what you should put in the law. So we were just the ready text, and we were circulated around everybody. So conservationists, foresters, herders. So we will just as our kind of passion, and there was a very interesting moment. So I was in a forestry conference in 2015, and there was one of the leader foresters, and he was said, "Oh, this was a 150 years old innovation from Hungarian foresters that we forbidden the forest grazing." And he knows that I am on this conference, and so he was talking against it. And 2 years later, actually, he invited me to have a lecture about forest grazing issues, and because it's not was because my person or our work. It was really that he influenced by the European innovation goals, and he went to visit Western farms, as in France or in other parts of Europe, and he realized that, it's not really bad, actually. So lots of things were helping our goals. So it wasn't just us, actually, but really it was kind of fortunate situations, but it's realized that we were invited to write a publication in the Hungarian Forestry Journal in this year, which is, I think it's a really huge thing that they were really interesting what we are talking, and they are appreciating this. So the other things which is kind of also the next topic is about how we can kind of recognize the people who has traditional ecological knowledge, because it's, as I told you, they thought that they are not herders on these woody regions. So I was invited for the herder meetings when I was a university student, and I keep connection with them, and still nowadays they are actually just an exhibition now in the municipality of this region, and now the municipality recognized they are kind of forever herders, so the most knowledgeable and the most elder herders, they got this prize, and they organized this year a traditional event when the main bishop actually blessing the herders at the end of the herding season, which was now, it's happened at the end of September in the city. So it was really nice. So actually now the people getting to know that there are herders around where they live. And which is also one of the most challenging, that organizing knowledge transfers, because there are many people who would like to do this work, but they have this generation gap, so they were not grew up in a herder family, so they are looking for the knowledge. So we can use also all the kind of meetings and platforms, online platforms as well, to kind of share this knowledge. And as it I would like to, because I really like this sentence, that it shows that it's from the middle of the 20th century already, that a shepherd or a herder told that the shepherd's pot has broken already. So it's kind of symbolizing that the traditional lifestyle and the traditional knowledge transfer is broken, because they were eating together, and also all from the young and the elders, and also everybody in the family. So actually this was a really important part of their lifestyle. They were sharing the knowledge at this time. So interestingly, the conservation ranger became more and more interesting in herding activities. So some of them are kind of real herders now, because they are goes and visiting the elder herders and try to learn. And also there is a nice film about it, how herders learn their herder skills and knowledge. It's in YouTube, and it's got English subtitle if you are interested in. So, and also I think it's also very important to kind of support the farmers, the direct financial support. So if we are just talking about agriculture subsidies, sometimes it's really tricky. So for example, still in Hungary, the European subsidized system don't accept the large trees on grasslands, except in the Mediterranean region. So it's still a very tricky management. So it's really need acknowledge people. So there was a gastro TV show in Hungary, which is the most popular TV show, and we invited this show to our region to show the products of food pastures. Was mainly white beer in this show, and also introduce the herders, also to acknowledge and spread the news that they are living. And about which I really like also to work with the children and communities during the school activities, because this is the time now when they are able to go to visit the village around. Formerly, usually the parents who took the wood pastures, and it was a common land, so they were using as a playground during the childhood. But now most of them are private and sometimes or abandoned, and so it has changed. So actually, the connection is in a way it's broken between the children and the herders nowadays. So we would like to encourage this. So I worked in a couple of villages, and it was really nice. So just one of the feedback of the here, which I was really proud that of it, they were driving this. So as we are getting to the end of the presentation, and I will show now just also a very short video, but it's subtitled, but I'm not sure that you could read it. So I will just, if you are thinking because many of you are students and you are thinking about as a student as how you could get a success to change something in your topic. So these are our kind of main messages, that first of all you need kind of to have the people kind of experiencing and feeling and like emotional through art, active, experiential and emotional learning, and celebrate the history and the tradition as the local elder people about the topic, integrate education for example, in the local wood pasture into the daily curriculum at the local school, study the science of the forest habitat in all their complexity, but it's also in other subject, and recognize the bioculture and the economical values, and use interdisciplinary lens to see the forest both as nature and as an influence in local culture. And it's also really important by listen, dance, enjoy and create nature-themed local folk music. There are many actually, and dance to experience the forest through art, and also important to engage the local stakeholders, meet them and share your knowledge and care for a place to influence policy. But the last, but one of the most important, love the nature, in this case that the ancient trees and the woodland. So these are the kind of most important aspect, I think, during a remaking or a reconnection process. So now I just short video about
hívják ezeket a fákat vándorló.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.